the world or study abroad is to actually ask the questions that are on their mind rather than me trying to read their mind and me go off on little rants. So if you do have any questions, feel free to interrupt. So I think, like Lisa said, I graduated in '06. I can't believe that was 10 years ago. And so I went to Wisconsin, graduated in 2010. But before that, I did study abroad in Cape Town. And I guess when I was in Cape Town, it was the first time that I'd actually even been out of the country. I was born and raised in Muskego. My parents met at Muskego High School and graduated in the class of '69. So it's fair to say that I am definitely a Muskego native. And the fact that that was my opportunity to live and study in Cape Town was the first time that I'd really, I guess, had an opportunity to see the world. And it was also the first time that I'd ever felt, I guess it was one of the first times I really felt like an adult, because it was the first time that I didn't have my parents, my beck and call whenever something went wrong. And it was a great opportunity for me to see what it was like to be so far away and have to, I guess, fend for myself. So if it wasn't for me studying abroad in Cape Town, I definitely would have never moved to Australia. Sorry, let's talk about some numbers. I am a science person, so I'm a numbers person. A lot of times, and I guess for some reason it's still surprising to me, that Australia is the same size as the lower 48 states, actually to 95%. So if you took the continental US, it's the same size as Australia. But when you start talking about population of the US is 320 million, but Australia is about 20 million, like I think 20 million total. So you're talking about less than 8% of the total population of the US is the total population of Australia. So you start to get this idea of how empty a lot of Australia is. And that's one of the first things that kind of struck me upon moving here, was the fact that there is a lot of nothing. And that kind of delves into the way that people live here. Because you kind of have this section of mega cities that's separated by a whole lot of nothing. So you have the biggest city being Sydney, and then Melbourne. There's not much between those two. So you have these kind of subcultures that are really existing without much of a transition between them. So for urbanization at that point, 90% of Australia lives in some sort of urban environment. That's, again, giving you this idea that there's a lot of empty space here. And it's beautiful because you have a lot of untouched earth, but it's hard to get between places here. So ethnicity-wise, Australia is about 90% Europe, or 90% of Australians identify with some sort of European descent, and about 8% identify as Asian. And in at least these numbers, people were allowed to identify as one or both or multiple ethnicities. But I'll focus a little bit more about the increasing Asian population as well, because there's been a lot of work, I shouldn't say work, there's been a lot of legislature historically that made it very difficult for people that weren't of European descent to actually make a living in Australia. So only recently, of 2011, did Australia actually see its the increase of Asian populations be the most or the highest frequency of immigrants to Australia. And especially in the urban setting in Sydney, you're seeing a large influx of Asian culture, which is actually fantastic because you get fantastic food for that. But only 2% of people identify as some sort of Aboriginal or Native Australian. So when we say Native Australian, I'm also talking about Torres Strait and Islander Aboriginals. So there's much evidence that the Aboriginal population has been in Australia for at least 40,000 years. Some people even argue that's 140,000 years. So we're talking about an amazing amount of time that people have been in Australia and given the opportunity to develop their own cultures. So as I go forward, I'm actually going to be quite deliberate in separating the two. I will probably talk a little bit about Australian Aboriginal culture and what I would probably call white Australian culture, because they are very separate. And I would feel like I'm doing a disservice to the Aboriginal population if I wasn't to address any of that. Just to give you an idea, again, about the population of Australia, 20% of the entire population of Australia lives in Sydney. So if you were to make the same type of proportions in the US, New York being the largest city, you need to have 65 million people living in New York City. So you kind of have, again, this idea of mega cities separated by almost desert. And I think that stops, it kind of bottlenecks a lot of the flowing of ideas and allows for these very different cultures to grow up between each city. So as far as history goes, again, Aboriginal Australians have been here for over 40,000 years. In the late 1700s, when Europeans first started settling in Australia, there were something like 500,000 Aboriginal persons living within Australia. Over 500 tribes were identified, or what we actually call them as mobs. And to date, there are over 300 language groups that are recognized by the Australian government that are native to Australia. So that's many times more than are recognized in Europe. Just to give you an idea of the diversity that's lived here in Australia. Sadly, the Australian people were actually only given the right to vote in 1962. So Australia became what we call Commonwealth in 1901, and the fact that white or European settlers have been here since 1778, that's a long time for the government not to officially recognize its native peoples as, well, in all honesty, they weren't even recognized as people for a very long time here. And there's some similarities between that and Native Americans. Similar, again, population decimation and land being repurposed and taken from its native owners. So it's not directly or parallel, but definitely similarities between Native Americans and Aboriginal Australians. So, to go on that as well, there's something called terra nullius, which actually in 1971, we're talking even 70 years after Australia was a country, the Australian government officially said that there were no native civilizations in Australia, so that there was no repatriation that needed to happen when Europeans resettled Australian lands. So that means that there's been inherent not discrepancies, but I'm looking for. It's been a very unfair, I guess, an unfair. What am I looking for? Sorry. It's been very difficult to be an Aboriginal Australian in Australia. They're faced with mass poverty. Alcoholism is a problem, and drugs, gambling, and there hasn't been historical government support for that. It is on the mend, which is good, because terra nullius, like I was talking about, was actually officially overturned in '92, and since then there's been some momentum towards correcting the mistakes that have happened in the past. That'll be most of the sad things that I've said are not done. Okay, so Australians first settled here in the late 1700s, and most of them were convicts. And that definitely is a point of pride for most people here. So if your family came on what we call the first fleet, you know if they came on the top of the boat or on the bottom of the boat, meaning were they shackled and chained, or were they in the army or navy that was in charge of keeping the convicts straight? I have plenty of friends here that know exactly what their great-great-great-grandparents stole, like a pair of shoes would actually get you unwillingly sent here. So you can imagine over the hundreds of years that white settlement has happened. It's been an interesting mix of characters, and I think that's led quite a bit to the interesting personality that Australians have now. So over the time that Australia was used as a penal colony, which was until 1870, over 160,000 people were unwillingly shipped here from the UK and Ireland. And that also led to the fact that most people here are of UK or Irish descent. And that also plays a huge role in religion here. And only post-World War II did Australia actually kind of become more European rather than just more UK. And that was because, and actually something fun that I learned while looking into this, my grandfather even owned a pub down here during World War II. There was a lot of Americans stationed down here. There were a lot of Europeans stationed down here, and it was actually just, people found it was a nice place to live. So while Europe was dealing with the decimation of World War II, a lot of people just chose to relocate to Australia. But it also led to something called the White Australia policy, which was a thing until the 70s. And the White Australia policy was essentially the fact that they were afraid of mass immigration from Asia, and that they would lose their white heritage. So until the 70s, the Australian government could test you in any sort of language, European language, to see if you actually were welcome or useful in Australia. So, you know, let's say I was immigrating from Poland, which my family is Polish, they could ask me to take a test in Greek. I do not speak Greek, let alone I don't speak Polish, but it was definitely used to pick specific types of persons to inhabit Australia. So that, again, has played a large role in setting the stage for current Australia. But so I'll go a little bit more into holidays and beliefs here, because they are heavily from the population is mostly from the UK. It's mostly Christian. But I've talked to a couple people who've spent time in Australia and in the UK or in the US. A lot of people here aren't as strongly practicing, I guess, or they don't as strongly identify Christian. So 25% of the population identifies as non-religious. Whether that means atheist, agnostic, or anything else, I cannot say. But we have all the fantastic holidays that we get to celebrate in the US plus more. So I get Boxing Day off, which is the 26th of December. I have no idea what it actually means. It's something about repurposing presents, I've been told, but I'm glad to get that off. But mostly between the middle of December and the middle of January, we call that silly season. Most people take the month off. So cafes are closed, some grocery stores are closed, restaurants are closed. It's the height of summer. Everyone just goes down to the beach, and it's pretty wonderful. The beaches here are definitely part of the Australian culture, and it's almost considered un-Australian to not at some point have a Barbie while watching an amazing sunset on the beach. So we also have Australia Day, which is the 26th of January. Sorry, 21st of January. Oh my gosh. So that also leads to an interesting type of current discussion, and that's the day when the first fleet landed. So the first fleet is the first boat full of convicts that started to settle here. And it's actually now starting to be called Invasion Day, because so many Aboriginals are feeling like they've lost their culture or are forced to adopt a European culture starting on that day. We also have Anzac Day, which is kind of like Memorial Day, which we also commemorate here. But Anzac Day is the Australian New Zealand Army Corps, and it's just a day to remember those that had fallen. And then we have something called Melbourne Cup, Melbourne. Here is actually pronounced Melbourne. And it also touches on the fact that in Australia there's a bit of a betting issue. Australia is the first rated, or has the highest gambling percentage in the world amongst adults, and it's definitely part of your daily life. You see adverts for gambling all the time. They will actually be what we call pokies in pubs. You see entire shop fronts that are just dedicated to gambling, and it's disproportionately populated by those that are perhaps the most in need of some type of assistance. So that is, if living in Australia, that's something you're very aware of, is the fact that gambling is an addiction, and it affects a large number of people here. Okay. Also, being a Commonwealth, we get to celebrate the Queen's birthday, although the day we get off for her birthday is not her birthday, and it differs by state. Essentially, I think it's just another reason to have a day off here, which is pretty great. But this also ties into this whole work ethic that Australians are often thought of as lazy, but it's more the fact that it's one of the hardest things for me to adjust to. My first day my first day of work here, or school here, whatever you want to call it, I showed up at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I was the only person in the office. Most people here will, at least at the university, will show up between 9:30 and 10. And it's this work-life balance that I feel never was stressed in the US. So I feel like in Australia, they have an idea of you only have so many hours in a week where you're really productive. And after that, you're just sitting in a seat. So I think a lot of companies here really stress this idea of work-life balance. Be here, but also make sure that you have the other parts of your life that make you happy. And I have two older siblings, and one of my sister works maybe 50, 60 hours a week. And I get to tell her that I get to work 40 hours a week, and I get 4 weeks of vacation a year. And it's always something that makes me feel a little bit better when I have to say I'm still in school at 27. At least I get more vacation than she does. We also have free healthcare. So that has been actually an Australian standard since the 60s. If you are a permanent resident of Australia, you have free healthcare. You also had free college education until 1992. Now you pay very little, but it's something called it's something called a HECS. So you don't pay any tuition when you are in university. But once you leave university or matriculate, you actually only pay back once you hit a certain income threshold. And it's up to 3% of your total income. And it's actually, I know for a fact that a lot of my friends, that's the only reason that they were actually able to attend school. So your only job, if you were to go to school and to university in Australia, is if you get accepted, you do not have to worry about tuition. And that has led to Australia being one of the most highly literate and highly educated countries in the world. We have a literacy rate of 99%, which is actually tied to be second in the world. And it definitely shows. And on top of that, Australians are extremely well-traveled. You are so isolated here. I'm 10,000 miles away from you guys right now. So when people decide to go on vacation, they go all out. You know, if I were to live in Perth, which is actually in Western Australia, I'm closer to Indonesia than I am to Sydney. So you kind of have this inherent desire to just kind of go off to other countries and spend more time traveling and seeing the world, because otherwise you're so isolated on this little island. But I think because of that as well, Australia has this fantastic, I should say Australians have this fantastic awareness of global politics. And I think that leads to a lot of people choosing to actually settle down in other places and even be politically active. There is definitely an active part of the Australian politics. In Australia, there is something called compulsory voting, which means you have to vote, regardless of the importance, whether it be you voting for the local sheriff, or you voting for a mayor, or you voting for your state representative. You have to vote, otherwise you will be fined. And voting here happens on a Saturday, not on a Tuesday, so that it's with the idea that people aren't disadvantaged by having to vote in the middle of the week. And I think that plays a very important role in the way that Australian politics happen overall. So it's not a democracy. We have instead oh my gosh, I'm forgetting right now. Oh, sorry, forgetting exactly what it's called. But we have multiple parties in Australia. We even have a gun enthusiasts party that was actually voted into Parliament last year. And we have motorist enthusiasts that also got voted in. It's a very interesting place where you can actually start your own party to have whatever interests that you'd like. And depending on how many votes you get or how much power you get, you're actually allowed to represent your state. But because of that, there's over 20 parties that are currently represented in the Australian Senate. So it's a very interesting balancing act when it comes to politics. Also, as an American, the first thing you'll probably, if you ever come to Australia, the first thing you'll get asked is about guns. There was something called the Port Arthur Massacre in 1996, and 36 people were killed in Tasmania, which is the southern part of Australia. At the time, that was the largest massacre to date. And we actually had a very conservative government in power that stepped in and chose to buy back people's guns. And since 1996, we haven't had a single mass shooting in Australia. There's still violent crime. It tends to be more personal, but I think it's something that as a future global student, you need to be aware that you need to be able to discuss the current setting of the United States compared to the rest of the world when it comes to gun violence. It is disproportionately common, and it's very uncomfortable as an American living abroad, because it makes it hard to come home. And it's something that nobody has the right answer to, but it will be one of the first things that you are faced in a discussion in a global world, because people will find out you're American and they want to know what you think. And I think your ability to actually discuss it of sound mind will be of a fantastic advantage to anybody. But in Australia, that will be the first thing that you will be asked. It's expensive down here. I have to pay $4 for coffee in the morning and $6 for a gallon of petrol or gas. But minimum wage is also much higher. So for somebody that's in high school, you'll get a minimum wage of $16 an hour. And if you are in university, it goes up to 20. So it makes everything a little bit easier. But we also have a standard GST tax of 10%. So everything gets taxed at 10%, regardless of where you live. And let's see, all schools have uniforms. Public, private, doesn't matter. Everyone has a fantastic uniform. They are extremely outdated. But you also get to start school at about 9 o'clock if you're in high school. Some schools start as late as 9:30, which I would have killed for. You guys still start at 7:20?
Yeah, 7:25.
Oh, yeah. I haven't woken up that early, I think, in the 10 years since I've graduated. Still do the 6:20 mornings meetings for student council, Lisa?
So I'm not sure what they do anymore. It's changed a little bit since when you were in high school. So Jessica, you get to answer. No, Lindsay can answer that question. What do you do?
We do 6:30 now.
6:30 every Friday. So council's a bit different than when you were in council.
Oh,
It's over the course of the decade.
It's been a decade.
Yeah.
And I'm still in school.
Is the reasoning for starting school like 9:30? Is that all brain-based research that says high school students do better when they start later in the day because they've had enough sleep, whereas do elementary school students start earlier?
Elementary schools start about the same time. I think a lot of that is so that students can actually all commute at the same time, because
Okay.
especially in city, you will find somebody who's about 6 taking the train.
Okay.
But yes, it is sleep-based. At least the arguments that are even, there's currently arguments in Melbourne, which is south of here, to make it later, because
Okay.
exactly. You guys should sleep more.
And it sort of jives with the whole work starting later as well.
Right. Well, and I am obviously, my experience is biased. I'm still in school. And I also work in a very informal setting. So it's much easier for me to make my own hours. I'm not sure about the corporate setting, but yeah, it's, as soon as I got to university and the idea of sleeping through a class was introduced to my world, I wish very, very much that I had actually slept more in high school. So if it means that you guys just need to sleep an extra hour and stay off of Facebook for 1 more hour, I would have, that is the biggest change I would have made in high school. Get your sleep. Oh, it'll make such a world of difference. I can't speak enough about that. I think I realized how sleep deprived I was after I graduated. Right. We love sports down here also. There's no NFL, which stinks, but there's tons of rugby. And swimming's huge. You often, if you go to the beach on a weekend, you'll see 4-year-olds learning to tackle an ocean. They're called nippers, which is pretty cute. But, right.
Can you go on the sport of Australian football that got banned because
You might have to speak up.
I heard something about football that was banned.
no, Australian football, it got banned because it was incredibly dangerous or something.
Yeah, so you're probably talking about Aussie rules. We call that, well, it's Aussie rules football. It's not banned here, at least. Is rugby still being played in Muskego as a club sport?
Yeah.
Okay. So that type of rugby is called union in a global context. So that's union type rugby where you have the scrums and everyone's pushing back and forth. There's another type of rugby called rugby league, which is a little more, I guess, a little even more active. It's more like soccer. If any Australian heard me, they'd be terrified. It's a little bit more like soccer. So it's more open running. And then Aussie rules is like soccer except you hands. And yes, it can be very violent. In all forms of rugby, there's no padding. So when you imagine 2 people colliding, it can be very disastrous. That being said, you also don't have 350-pound men knocking into each other. People tend to be a little bit lower on the weight scale. But it hasn't been banned here as far as I know it's not. That would cause a riot. But definitely states here, some states have specific sports that they kind of identify more with. In Sydney, it's more rugby league, so not the one that they play in Muskego, but down south in Melbourne, it's Aussie rules there. I think the city of Melbourne has something like 4 teams. And it's fun to watch. And they also love cricket here. Cricket is not like baseball at all. They're both boring, but games can go for like 4 days. And they have tea breaks in the middle of some innings or whatever you want to call them, which is very interesting. But to trade it all, you also do have to deal with dangerous animals. We have a house guest currently. I don't know where he's hiding now, but it's a spider the size of my hand. It's a huntsman, but those are the ones that actually eat cockroaches. And cockroaches, there's nothing you can do. They are everywhere. It's a Mediterranean climate, so it doesn't matter if you keep the most spotless apartment in the world, you will find them. In Sydney also, there are things called redback spiders. They haven't killed an adult in a very long time, but they're dangerous for children and the elderly. And funnel webs, which are one of the most deadly spiders in the world. I have seen one of those in Sydney. Those you just don't mess with. You guys should, they're the worst. They look like they want to take you down, and they absolutely will. What else? Snakes. Snakes are also in Sydney. So kind of playing on this idea that Australia lives in mega cities. I have to drive an hour, and I am in the middle of a national park in any direction except for east, because that's an ocean. But every direction is a national park. So it's really easy to actually kind of reconnect with nature, but that also means that you need to be snake informed, I guess. Also, the sun down here is really hot. I tried, my partner was down here with me, and he didn't believe me when I'm like, put on your sunscreen, because we actually have a lovely ozone hole over Australia that will burn you in about 10 minutes. So you can always identify people that are visiting Australia or people that are new, because they will be absolutely sunburned. And it's actually it's entertaining, but it's also very dangerous, because skin cancer is the most prevalent cancer in Australia, and that 1 in 3 people will have it at some point in their life. So, I wanted to actually, can I see if I can play a video for you guys? Not sure if everyone's going. It's
so you should be able to share your screen, like on the left-hand side.
Okay.
There's like an option to share screen, and then.
Okay. Got it.
I have one student with a question, so can I have Jake ask that question while you're?
Absolutely.
Yeah. He's gonna move up to the computer so you can actually see him.
My question was like, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but you said you don't pay for college until after you have a job?
Right. So that's if you're Australian, and I'm sorry, I got distracted with everything.
So to follow, like, do they have college sports and like scholarships then, or no?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So if you are Australian, college sports here is an incredibly disappointing thing. I'll be completely honest, in that they have some people that are considered part of the elite athlete program, and they have universities compete against each other, but they don't have to be students. I don't get this at all. Yeah, it's really weird. So no, you cannot get a university scholarship just for your sport, but you can get some scholarships because of that. And for example, if you were to play on the cricket team, there's a lovely cricket ground on campus, but I don't know a single person that's ever attended a game. Same with basketball, or same with rugby, and it's really strange, because that's definitely something I miss. especially since, March Madness just happened, luckily, it's actually a nice time for us, and the games are about 9 in the morning. But there's nothing like that for collegiate sport down here. And so, yeah, if for an elite athlete, you just have to, I guess, apply for additional funding, but there's nothing that will be equivalent to getting a scholarship in the US. And to just also expand on the previous one, I have to pay tuition. So everything is very different if you're an international student. My tuition is about $40,000 a year. Luckily, I have a scholarship for that, which covers all of it. But if you were to, I'm not sure what the prices are if you're in undergrad, but because I'm in a postgrad situation, but I can't imagine they're actually much less than that. So you're talking about it's equivalent to getting your pharmacy degree. Like, it's a very large chunk of change. But there are a lot of people that actually choose to come down here for pharmacy and law because, or even medicine. It's only a 5-year program. Things are structured differently down here. So you also you only have to go to high school until you're 10. If you want to go to university, you have to go through 12 years. And then university is only 3 years. Master's degrees are very rare here, but instead you get something called your honors degree, which is equivalent to the 4th year of university, where it's just research. And so instead of in the US, especially at Wisconsin, since I only went to Wisconsin, they kind of do this breadth approach in education where you have your degree, but you also, so in my case, I had physics, but I also had to take social sciences and literature and language and different types of arts. So that what would they call a breadth or a balanced education. In Australia, it's extremely focused. So you would just take your physics classes and like basic mathematics and the other classes that you need for that degree, while not actually getting the exposure to the rest. That's actually much more the UK style of education. I've got my opinion on that, which I probably won't share. I don't like it. But yeah, as far as sporting goes, that's actually one of the things I miss the most in terms of collegiate sports. So, bummer.
Oh, so because we had technical difficulties at the beginning, Jane, we're right at the end. So anybody have any last minute questions or you want to say any last final things?
No, but I was actually going to share a funny video that if I can just send it to you later.
Yeah, send it to me and I'll post it for everybody. Everybody say thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, we got 1 o'clock in the morning for Jane right now. So, well, it's 2 o'clock now, but it was 1 o'clock when she joined us. So,
Bedtime. Sorry,
thank you
Lisa.
very much. Yeah, if you post, I'm sorry, if you email the video link to me, I will post it for them as part of our Google Classroom stuff. So.
Yeah, it's just a funny clip of all of the Australianisms.
Oh, okay.
It's a different language.
Yeah. So how hard was it for you to adjust to like the terminology and the word usage in Australia? Because I think I wouldn't say that normally you would use the word lovely a lot, but you used it when you referred to the cricket field, the pitch.
My brother thinks that I have a totally different accent now.
You do, yeah.
I don't recognize it, especially since Zach, my partner, is also he's from Madison.
Okay.
So like, I thought that we would like keep each other normal, but apparently not.
No, I wondered about that. So you cleared it up for me when you said that he moved there with you. I wasn't sure if he was from the States or if he was from Australia originally. Yeah,
we both have I even reckon my accent has gotten more Midwestern. But I'm also in a very strange situation where most of my friends are foreign because I'm in an academic situation. Right. And one of them is from Ireland, and I swear to God, he just makes my accent more like the O's and the A's and stuff. I also think that when I first moved here, everyone kind of like laid it on extra thick to try and confuse me.
Right.
But like, for example, if I were to say afternoon, everyone here says arvo. And
Oh.
I'm just like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just that kind of funny. There are some things that will just catch you off guard, and you're just like, what the heck? Why
Yeah.
would that be? Like SEPO apparently refers to people from the U.S. SEPO. It's
Huh.
not exactly a nice term, but it's
Yeah.
because septic tank rhymes with yank, and therefore it's American. And
Okay.
but
Wow.
I was told that it's very Cockney, which is a part of the UK apparently, and that's where a lot of the type of sense of humor also comes from.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I wasn't exactly sure what to.
No,
was
that's, it's all good because they know nothing. Like I didn't know any of the information about the education system, so that's fascinating. So I think just exposing them to other parts of the world, like, you know, the world is not U.S. centric, and you know, there are other parts of the world where things happen. And honestly, like my biggest goal is to just get them to realize that despite our differences, we have significantly more in common than we have different. And so, you know, that's the part that's fascinating for me. So
I realize now I did have a final thing to say, and it was the fact that because of going to Cape Town and like putting myself in a new situation, that's where I learned. That's where I had this sense of a global sense of self.
right.
And I think Muskego is obviously a great place, but I have actually no idea what the demographic is like there anymore.
It's pretty similar.
And it was the first time where you see that there is diversity, and diversity is actually the norm in global, anywhere you actually really want to be.
Yeah.
And I didn't get that point across, I think, as well as I would have liked to, but I don't know how I could have. There's nothing like seeing the world to make you realize
How small Muskego is.
Oh, yeah. If I want to do that, man, then I just have to talk about the universe, and I can
Right.
make everyone feel tiny.
Yeah.
Yeah. If there's something else I can do, like write up some notes as well, let me know.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I don't want to keep you up any longer, but I really appreciate you joining us. And sorry for I don't know, like, very oddly, the only sound I was getting, and it was like a minute delayed, was when I was speaking to you, and then it would come to feedback from us. And so it's something very strange with, I think my district computer, I happen to have my personal laptop. I'm logged into my district account, but it works. Today it's working better on the personal laptop. The last two Google Hangouts were kind of okay. I had Pune from Sweden, and hers went fine. And then I had Mo from Chicago, and we had a lot of feedback, but it still worked. So I don't know, you know, what the deal is there, but we'll figure it all out.